Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the IOP Speaker Series event, The Future of Israel and Palestine, From Incalculable Loss to a Viable Tomorrow. My name is Abby Langer, and I'm a second year in the college from Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm double majoring in global studies and political science. I recently took a course about free speech in the context of the Israel-Palestine conflict that has piqued my interest in the ways in which we are able to both listen and speak about this difficult issue. I'm looking forward to the chance to hear some shared and distinct perspectives on visions for peace in the Middle East from our guests today. I'm thrilled to introduce you to tonight's speakers, who will draw on their own personal experiences and activism to explore the practical and possible futures of the Middle East and ways of moving forward. Aziz Abu Sarah is a Palestinian peace activist, entrepreneur, and author who has implemented transformative peace initiatives across more than 65 countries in the aim of fostering cross-cultural understanding after losing his older brother, who was tortured by Israeli forces. Aziz is the co-founder of Interact International and Mejdi Tours, a socially conscious approach intended to bring together people from different backgrounds and perspectives. He also served as executive director at George Mason University's Center for World Religions, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution. Magen Inon is an Israeli educator who has worked to cultivate liberal values and leadership skills with students, military officers, young adults, and inmates. After losing both his parents on the October 7th terrorist attack, Magen has become a leading voice for peace between Israelis and Palestinians within international media, local communities, and the political elite. Magen has also collaborated with several other Palestinian peace activists to create shared spaces for dialogue and connection regarding the conflict in Israel and Palestine. Facilitating the discussion and Q&A tonight is Zeenat Rahman, the executive director of IOP, former special advisor to Secretaries Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, and former director at the Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Some quick housekeeping just before we begin. First, please silence your cell phones. Second, when it is time for Q&A, a microphone will be placed in the audience. Please line up at that time and remember that priority for first questions will go to students. Finally, please make sure to visit the IOP's website for information on future Speaker Series events, including Everybody Hates This, Healthcare, on January 16th from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. at the IOP, and The Fairness Coalition, The Politics of the Haves and Have-Nots, featuring Representative Katie Porter on January 23rd from 5 to 6:15 p.m. in the Ida Noise Cloister Club. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Aziz Abu Sarah, Magen Inon, and Zeenat Rahman.
Hi, everybody. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for being with us here today on this very frigid evening. Welcome to Chicago in January. I'm dealing with a throat thing, so forgive my voice. We're here tonight to really listen to the testimony and stories of these two remarkable individuals. And we're also going to spend, a lot of time in discussion and conversation with all of you. And so I do want you to think about the questions and the things that are on your mind that you want to talk to the two of them about after I ask them a couple of initial questions. But I'd like to begin with hearing each of your stories, I would say like long form, you don't have to do the shortcut version of it, and what brought you to this work. And Magen, can we start with you?
Yes, sure. It's not the long form, okay?
Not the long one, not where you were from the day you were born.
I was worried because I might not get
not
to
speak. I'm currently living in London. I've been there for the last 10 years, but originally grew up in Moshav Netiv HaAsara. Netiv HaAsara is the closest Israeli village to the Gaza border. It's right on the north. I had a very peaceful, pastoral childhood. The village is quite close to the Mediterranean Sea. These beautiful sand dunes. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings. Just a very calm childhood that I remember very fondly. But over the years, tensions with Gaza built up, and when I left, it was 2005, 2006. It was already after a few years where there were a missile attack on the village. But then I went to study in Jerusalem, met my wife, we moved together to London, and I left Moshav. It was still a base for my family. Apart from me, all my siblings still live in Israel. It was still a base for my family, and the summer of 23, we were there, me and my wife and my 3 kids, for a month with my parents. We really loved that place. On that Saturday of October 7th, London there's a 2-hour gap. I wake up and I start seeing WhatsApp messages from my family. Quite quickly we realized that this is something like we've never seen before. We managed to get one WhatsApp message from my dad saying that they've locked the house, they're in their safe room, and that was the last message we got from them. It took a few hours, and we were hoping it's just a network failure, but after a few hours we managed to get hold of one of the neighbors that said that the house is burning, and after a few more hours, we never got any official confirmation at that point. It took months actually, but we realized that it's unlikely that my parents survived the attack. And the next day I traveled to Israel to be with my family there. On that day, just to add a bit more, there was no information in the news that was, the chaos was very chaotic. There wasn't much accurate information in the news, but I graduated high school about 20-something years ago, and we had our 20th reunion. So for that, we opened a WhatsApp group of all my high school friends. And it's now places that many of you might have heard of, from Kfar Aza and Nachal Oz and Sderot and all those places around Gaza that were attacked on that day. And that WhatsApp group turned out to be the most accurate source of information. And then we started learning that, the brother of this friend has been killed, and one of our classmates was taken hostage, and suddenly we realized, it's not just my community, it's actually the entire, all the communities around Gaza that were attacked. So I fly to Israel the next day, and we decided as a family in Jewish tradition, there's something called a Shiva. It's a week of mourning following the death of a loved one. And even though you're supposed to do it after the funeral, we knew it's going to take some time until we can actually have funerals. So we decided to sit together for the Shiva, and you invite people to come to tell you stories about your loved ones. And this is what we've done, and we had thousands of people coming. From that area, we were the first family who had a Shiva because people were waiting for funerals. And so we had people coming, and something that was very natural for us, but people keep telling us that how unique it was. My family always had very good connections with very different communities within Israel. So my dad's best friend was a Bedouin, so his family came to be with us, and my brother has a business in Nazareth. It's the largest Arabic city in Israel. So we had friends from there coming to be with us. We had settlers that my dad used to work with come to us, and we had...
You should say what your dad's livelihood was.
Yeah, so I have proof, but my dad is the best farmer in Israel. It was. And it's like we're laughing, but I actually think it's true. But in his work, he was working with many different communities. And so many came to be with us, and also friends of ours from the village who lost loved ones. And we were all sitting together. And I think it was a real testament to the kind of family I grew up in, where you judge people by their actions, not by their identity or... and then after a week, it was an insane week. I can talk about that for an hour, but after a week, and just to take you there, tension in Israel at that point is insane. Like the feeling is that the personal trauma that we're experiencing is also on a national level. It's playing out on a national level as well. And we sat down the 5 siblings after everyone left, the last day. I was about to fly back to my family. I have 3 young kids, so I was about to fly back to London. And we sat down, we had a list of things we wanted to talk about, and one of the things on the list was, what are we going to say? Like we knew we're going to get quite a lot of media attention, partly because of my brother's business and his good connections to the media, but also people started asking us. And we also started reading in the news and on social media calls for revenge. And it took a minute, and maybe if someone asks, I'm trying to think why it took just a minute. But it took a minute until we all decided that we want to be very clear that revenge is not the legacy that our parents would have wanted.
You were unified amongst your siblings?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we have differences of opinion, but we share the same values. And so very quickly we came out saying, revenge is not the way. And we called for a ceasefire, immediately. And so for me, going back to London was important to say that in London as well. And so I published a piece in The Guardian telling the story of my parents, but also saying we don't think that military force will provide security for the people living in Israel. And after that, it started a chain of a lot of media attention, a lot of work with organizations. And one of the things that as a family we did, my brother went on the media a lot, and my sisters, one of the things we didn't expect was that almost immediately we had people like Aziz and other Palestinians reach out to us and to share our grief and find ways where we can collaborate and provide a different vision. So that's how we first met and what we've been doing since.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aziz.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'll start with the end.
10 minutes, we have a clock.
Actually, 11. I monitor, so I have an extra minute. I'll start with the end of on October 7th, then I'll take you back to my personal story. And I woke up on that day, talked to my colleague here, Scott, and to another colleague of ours, Kim, who's found out her best friend was taken hostage in Gaza. And then a day after, I got a message from one of my tour guides. I work in tourism as well, run a travel company called Majdi Tours that runs peace-focused travel programs in Israel and Palestine, but many other destinations as well. And I got one of our tour guides who called me and said, "Do you remember I introduced you to this guy 10 years ago named Maoz, who's Magen's brother? His parents were killed in Hamas attack, and I just thought you want to know." Now, I've met Maoz once, 10 years earlier, never talked after that. Met Magen only also once in his house in London, never talked after that, but we all become friends on Facebook because that's the real friendship in these days is Facebook. That's the litmus test.
If you're old.
if you my age. Yes. Thank you for making me feel.
You're welcome. I'm with you.
But I decided to send that message to Maoz, but also to few other people who I found out who lost family members. Have to say, not everyone responded. And doing an act of empathy does not always result in the response you want, which is important. I think we often assume, or we hear a lot about the good stories that can come out of a relationship like this, but it doesn't always happen. And from there, my relationship with Maoz, my relationship with Magen has strengthened significantly. And then for the next year and 3 months, we started getting similar stories of my friends and family in the West Bank and Gaza. And in this year, even the last few weeks, Magen's brother and I are writing a book together. And to write the book, we've been interviewing people both in Israel and in Gaza. And we just talked to some of my friends there, people like Abdurrahim Abu Warde, who lost 50 people in his family in Gaza. His whole family has been wiped out. And when we talked to him, Maoz and I, he was asking about Maoz and saying, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Then I said, Abdurrahim, I think your parents are still in Gaza, right? And he said, yeah, actually my dad just got wounded 2 days ago and he's in the hospital now. And yet he showed such an unbelievable empathy that I think of myself, and I don't know if I could do that. When you have your dad in the hospital 2 days ago and 50 people in your family, mostly children, that's being killed. We interviewed another friend who's from Chicago, who we've met together, Thaer, who was a doctor in Gaza. And he, for 2 hours, was telling us stories of serving in Gaza and how devastating it was. And how some of his friends, just in this last month, has been taken for no realistic reason, taken into prison, not able to even see a lawyer, not able to see the Red Cross. And so you hear all these stories as we working together. And then you wonder, then how do you do this? And I'll take you first into my story and tell you how do we do this despite that, because that's not how I grew up. I grew up in Jerusalem. Palestinian kid, didn't have really, I thought I had a normal childhood until I realized it wasn't normal childhood. And I'll give you an example. When you were a kid going to school, for some of you it might be a while ago like me, what did you take with you to school every morning? What was the most important things you had to take with you to school? Help me out, come on. Lunch, yeah, that's the most honest answer.
And water.
Yeah, what else? Homework maybe? No good students. Homework, right? And you take with you anything else? Books, yeah, your backpack. I had to take with me an onion to school. Anybody can guess why an onion? Oh, no one here has been to a real riot or something, I can tell. It's because if you fire that tear gas, an onion is one of the ways you can keep yourself from suffocating. And since I was 7 years old, I went home to my mom and I made the case that school is not worth going to. Because I was fired that tear gas on the way to school. And I said, I'm not going back to school. I don't think I should be dying for education. That's not worth it. And she had to convince me to go back to school, and she convinced me by giving me an onion. And so for years, I didn't think I was the only kid who carried an onion with me. I thought all of you, everyone around the world goes to school with an onion. And it took me years to realize that's not a normal childhood. But that's what it's like to grow up where I grew up in East Jerusalem. If you, a couple of years later, my older brother Taysir, who was 9 years older than me, I'm the youngest of 7. I'm what you call the oops child. My parents stopped having kids, and 9 years later, which really doesn't make sense being an oops child, because my parents are very religious Muslims and they don't drink alcohol, and I don't know how
See, this is TMI.
Just saying. But it meant my older brother, Taysir, who's 9 years older than me, was really more of my parent. He was arrested from home on allegedly throwing rocks at Israelis. He was beaten up in prison, which resulted in him dying soon after he was released from prison. He was 19 and I was 10. And I was angry, I was bitter, and the main thing I could think about was revenge. And that was my life for the next 8 years. So I didn't believe in the whole thing we're doing here now. And I understand if some of you here don't believe in it, because I was there. I even refused to learn Hebrew. It was mandatory in my high school. I refused to learn Hebrew for 3 years. Still passed all my tests, but since we have a lot of college students, I won't say how. But for 3 years, wouldn't learn Hebrew, finished high school, realized if you lived in Jerusalem and you don't speak Hebrew, it's a problem. You can't go to college, you can't work. And then I had to look for the best place to learn Hebrew. Where's the best place to learn Hebrew? Ulpan, which is if you're here a Jewish American, you immigrate to Israel, that's where you go learn Hebrew. I signed up, and I was the only Palestinian in a class with mostly Jewish students and a couple foreigners who wanted to learn Hebrew for biblical reasons. I was 18 at that time, and yet that was my first ever introduction or relationship or sitting down with an Israeli who wasn't a soldier and wasn't a settler. But more importantly, it was my first time realizing that the two of us here should never be divided, which is, I think, what most people, when they look at us, divide us. He's Israeli, I'm Palestinian. And that's not the way we should be divided. If we should be divided in any way, it should be, and that's what I realized in that Hebrew class. It's those of us who believe in justice, who believe in equality, who believe in reconciliation, who believe in working together, who believe in freedom for all, and those who don't yet. That's the right way to divide us, because it shouldn't be based on religion, shouldn't be based on ethnicity, shouldn't be based on nationality, should be based on values. And what I found in that Hebrew class is I have Israelis, we share the same values together. But the second lesson I learned, and is a much harder lesson, is how when I was 10 years old, I felt that I had no choice. That everything I've done, or I felt I had to go into this path of revenge, that there is no other choice. And when you're 10 years old, I wasn't where Ma'oz and Magen were, that were a little older than me, and so could think maybe about this a bit more logically. But for me, it felt like if somebody had just punched me in the face. And if somebody punched you in the face, what's the first thing you do?
Punch back?
You punch back. I like this about Chicago, you're honest. Speak in some places, people are like, oh, I just look at them and give them a hug. I'm like, yeah, right. Believe that. But yeah, you punch back. And I felt I had no other choice. And in that Hebrew class, I realized that's not true. You do have a choice. Actually, every time you choose to hate, you are being, or I was being, a slave to the person who killed my brother. Because I was not making my own choice and my own decision. I was reacting to their action. And he didn't only kill my brother, ruin my family, but also destroyed my life for many years. And I was making all my choices based on that person's action. And I have to tell you, today in a lot of issues around the world, and I worked in many places, this is one of the worst things I always keep hearing. We have to respond with force because of what they do. And that's not true. You cannot control what other people do, but you always can control how you respond. And for me, choosing this work, us being together, figuring out how we can stop the killing, how we can save lives, many lives, that is the right choice. Choosing to forgive, not because the person who killed my brother deserves it, they don't, but because it's my choice and my ability, and this is what I wanted to do.
So, Aziz, you've been doing this work for a while. Can you talk a little about this past year? Was that notion tested for you, given kind of the, disproportionate lives lost in Gaza? That from within your community and for you yourself, did you think about, maybe I'm not going to do reconciliation work?
It was definitely tested in the sense the pain is unbearable. In the first week after October 7th, my next door neighbor in Jerusalem, my parents' next door neighbor, was killed, a teenager. He was shot in the head. And in the next few weeks after story, I was talking to my family, nobody could leave their home. I have people in my family quit their jobs because they felt it was unsafe to even go to work. The fear that everyone lived in, my nephews deleted every app on their phones because when they would leave the house, will be stopped by the police, and if they have any social media apps, they would get arrested or detained or beat up. So it was a horrifying time, even in the first few days for my family. And I was just in Jerusalem before October 7th, had come to the States, and so I wasn't also there, which makes it 10 times harder. And then for the next few weeks, I was talking to friends every friend I know in Gaza, everyone had lost multiple family members. Ahmed El-Hilu lost 60 people in his family. My friend, one of my friends told me her family left their home and escaped to the south of Gaza, so her neighbors asked if they can use their house because they had some family escaping there. She watched that house being bombed on television, knowing all her neighbors were there, all dying on TV. And so, yes, it is extremely challenging, and it makes you very angry. But I think at no point I felt I would give up on the work I'm doing. But what I decided to do is to use that anger to fuel that work we are doing. I want this to stop. And the question, how do you do it?
Yeah.
And anger is like a nuclear power. You can either use it, preferably we don't have it, but if you're gonna have nuclear power, then you can use it either for creating a bomb, or you can use it for creating electricity. And so we use that anger, we use that pain to create electricity, to create a light, to model a difference. I think nothing scares extremists, nothing scares those who promote war, who promote death, who promote destruction, than the sight of the two of us together. Because when they say there's no future possible, we say, here, there's no two more people who should hate each other than us. And if we able to model that it is possible, we don't agree on everything, but if we can model it is possible, not just to sit together, but also to have the same values, to talk about the future, to advocate, whether in Congress or with communities, to go together into Israeli cities, into Palestinian cities, and talk together. I was with Magen's brother in the West Bank, within Israel, in different places, speaking everywhere. Then we show that a different future is possible.
Magen, what about in Israel? Like, how have people received, this message, which it sounds like you and your siblings came to right away, which I find hard. Like, I don't even think I could do that.
Let me divide the question to I don't know how many parts. First of all, it's very hard to criticize someone who just lost their parents. So I think hopefully we won't have any hecklers today. I think if you heckle us who lost loved ones, you're an asshole.
Okay.
But that means we have moral weight that we can use.
Yes.
We have a voice that we can use, and then the question is, how do you use it?
Yes.
And so I think the criticism we're getting in Israel is not, again, it's very hard to criticize. People do, but it's more, they're naive. They're
Kumbaya.
What?
The Kumbaya people.
Yeah, they're naive, they're hippies.
Or they don't realize they're being used for something
or
else's.
they're being manipulated.
Right.
And I think it's the exact opposite. I mean, my dad was the most pragmatic, he's not just, there's a reason why he's the best farmer in Israel. He's the most pragmatic person I know. And so the question, I think, why we as a family came to that conclusion so quickly is like, okay, I want to make things better. How would revenge get me there? I want to have a better future for it. Let's say, I think we have a moral duty towards Palestinians, but let's say just within Israeli society, like we want to make Israelis safer. We've tried doing that with military force for decades.
Right.
I think for me, what happened on October 7th was a wake-up call in the sense that we cannot manage the conflict anymore. And I think that the crisis is horrible, but it's also an opportunity. And I think more and more people in Israel realize that we can use this crisis in order to turn it into something good. And we can use the crisis in order to, I think more and more people realize that the status quo is unsustainable. And then
Do you think that realization has come kind of in the last year and plus?
No, I think it's following October 7th. I think, again, for 30 years, we thought the army is going to protect us.
Yeah.
And it did. It protects Israelis 99 out of 100 times, but not always. And it's not enough to have the strongest military in the Middle East. You must have a diplomatic process alongside that.
Right.
If you want to allow, and again, I think we have a moral duty here, but even if you don't care at all, you only care about Israelis, the only way Israelis will be safe is if we have a diplomatic process and if we have peace. And
so not to cut you off, but to jump in on that, I mean, today, Secretary Blinken made his last speech as Secretary of State, and it was all about, very, very much laying out a plan for a ceasefire, which how many times have we heard that story? But, everybody, all parties from, the Qataris to the Israelis to the Trump administration incoming to Blinken are saying they're this close, right? I guess what needs to happen in terms of getting over, what is the day after plan from where you sit as peacemakers, maybe in terms of civil society? We know there's the diplomatic process that will roll out, but what needs to happen kind of on the human side?
I'll start very briefly, but I think our job is actually not to look at the present.
Okay.
Someone needs to look 5 years and 10 years ahead. Politicians are not doing that. So someone needs to say, this is our vision. We want peace, okay? 2030, peace in the Middle East. What do we need to do today in order to get there?
Right.
Of course we need a ceasefire. Of course. We need the war to stop. We need the hostages back. You don't need, with enough pressure it would happen. And then what? Where do we want to be in 10 years' time? And I think our vision is very clear. The only viable future for Israelis and Palestinians is to come up with a solution to the conflict that allows both people between the river and the sea to coexist, live together. You find the words. I don't care about the words. Not kill one another.
Yeah.
And so that's our vision, and it can only happen based on shared values of equality, human rights. And so if we say, okay, this is our vision, now what do we need to do in order to get there? We need to have enough Israelis and Palestinians buy into that. Okay, how do we do that? And then you can start forming a program, pragmatically, and how do we get there? So I think...
Can we talk about the political will for a second? Because I think I skipped over the fact that we've gotten pretty close on ceasefire talks. How many times have we heard this?
Many times.
But it does feel like they've never with such fervor said we're this close. I thought maybe it would happen before this panel is the way they were talking about it today. Why now? If you all can kind of maybe look to what's going on in whether with Netanyahu or with Hamas of knowing the leverage of Trump administration coming in a few days.
And before we get to that, and I'll answer that.
I do want you to answer that. Okay.
But before we get to that, I want to say one of the reasons negotiations have continued to fail again and again, not only with the ceasefire, but even before the ceasefire, is, to my knowledge, none of those negotiations have included peacemakers. So you go to negotiations with a group of, I've met many of the people who negotiated even for this ceasefire. It's a bunch of lawyers and generals. And I'm not saying anything about you lawyers in the audience.
It's probably a lot.
But if you don't have peacemakers in the room, you're missing out a huge aspect of what makes those agreements work. I would add even more, in most of the recent, especially, negotiations, not a single woman in the room, even though we know for any agreement to succeed, if you include women in it, it goes 30% higher likelihood of success. And yet, by the way, not only Israel and Palestine, the last 44 peace agreements signed anywhere in the world, only 3 of them, I think, or 4 of them had women involved in it. So there is some serious problem in how we conduct diplomacy as a whole. In this aspect, why now? I think the Trump administration seems to be much more interested to get Gaza off its hand and doesn't want to deal with what's going on there now, and they want to push for a deal. And it is not what many people probably expected. I think a lot of Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in America were hoping that's the direction it would go. And until a week ago, if you asked me, I would have said it doesn't look likely based on the appointments that the Trump administration was having. Yet, reading the Israeli news, not the American news, but reading the Israeli news, the reports is that Donald Trump is putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu.
What's the leverage?
I mean, again, it's going into things I'm not an expert on, but I mean,
I can claim expertise.
No, I can claim it. I'm not sure I have it. But Trump can tomorrow, stop. There's a lot of funding and weapons being going to Israel. He can decide now to stop it. I mean, the U.S. has quite a bit of leverage over what's happening. I can say, living in London, I'm more involved in the politics there. The UK doesn't have that leverage. So we're trying to push the government in the UK to do other things that they can do. But the US has enough leverage on Israel to decide that there's a ceasefire immediately.
And this leverage has been used before, by the way. Reagan used it in '82. George W. Bush, not maybe remembered as the best president in the United States. However, in 2006-07, he used it as well with Ehud Olmert, with the war in Lebanon. And he called him and said, end this war now. And really, for me, because I've been at the State Department a few times in the last year, I've been in Congress, met many members of Congress and senators in the last year. And the question we kept asking, why is President Biden unwilling to use that kind of leverage? Or why does he not have maybe that leverage? What makes him unable to do what other presidents, ones who are way more conservative than him on this issue maybe, have been willing to do? And it's a little bit baffling to come to the answer. And it's even more surprising, or maybe not surprising, that again, it's a Republican president. Mentioned Reagan and mentioned Bush, it's a Republican president that's saying, enough, and it stops. Oh, potentially. Let's all hold our fingers that it does happen.
We're in a church. Let's all pray. You alluded to it, but what is your shared vision for a future? And would love to hear concretely, American college campuses, American civil society is such a large part of this conversation has really dominated. This issue has really dominated our consciousness since October 7th. And so what is the role for people who are not Israeli and are not Palestinian in that shared vision? And I'm going to go to questions soon, so get ready to ask your questions.
So I think the most pragmatic and concrete thing we can do at the moment is not think in concrete terms, and I'll explain why. So we have two narratives that are now controlling the discourse. Let's say Hamas, this fundamentalistic idea that somehow you can kick all the Jews out of the land between the river and the sea, and you have the messianic settler extremists who think you can somehow kick all the Palestinians from the land between the river and the sea. And they've been pursuing those visions for the last few decades. Right. And even though they've succeeded in controlling the discussion, those narratives are illusions. They're not going to happen. There's 7 million Palestinians in that land. There are 7 million Jewish Israelis in that land. They're not going anywhere. So those two narratives are illusions, and they will crumble in the face of reality. So the best thing and the most pragmatic thing we can do is offer a different narrative. Mm-hmm. And that narrative is about the future. It's not about the past. And that means, and I think this is what is the most needed thing at the moment, is giving people the hope that peace is possible. Because otherwise they're left with these two options that are win-lose, but ultimately are lose-lose. And so we need to offer that hope that there's a win-win option that we've been pursuing for some time. It hasn't been on the table for a while, but it's not lost, it's not forgotten, and ultimately it's coming. It's just a question of time. Because this is the one narrative, the one vision that is not an illusion, that is pragmatic, is real, and we can work towards it. It's not going to be easy, but if you have enough will, then let's sit at the table and find a solution. Yeah. But that's details. If we have a vision and we agree on the values and we're pursuing that vision, then the rest becomes details.
But I have some concretes.
Okay, hold on, but just to respond to that, I think people could have that will. I think politicians don't have that will.
Right. Yeah, but we choose our politicians. Politicians are great. They do wherever the wind blows, they go.
Right.
Let's create the wind.
Yeah, we didn't create the wind, but yeah, I wish we did.
If you're in Chicago, it's easy. There's a lot of wind. You just have to redirect the wind. There is in sociology a rule called the 3.5% rule, which if 3.5% of a society actually wants something and actively pursuing it, not just dreaming about it that one day we will get it, but dreaming and acting, having a vision and really day after day, not once a week, not once a month, day after day, you actually can change reality. So there are a few things people here can do. The first one is to have that vision, to have that dream. You don't have a dream, it doesn't work. The Bible says where there is no vision, people perish. We're in a church, it's very proper to use the Bible. So that's one. The second thing I would say is to amplify voices of people who are talking about solutions, amplify examples. The week after October 7th, we were collecting money, working with Israeli friends of mine in the West Bank who had family members or friends being killed, going to the West Bank to help with villages that being attacked from settlers and kicked out of their homes, and we were working together a week after. Those examples, those stories didn't make it into any media. Nobody shared them on social media. There's here a couple hundred people. Get on social media and share those type of stories. Share this kind of story. Start being part of amplifying the voices of people who are pushing for a change and pushing for a solution. That's a second one. Give legitimacy to those voices. We talk about politics. Politics works on legitimacy as well. We need to create legitimacy for people who are working for peace as leaders of the future. As potentially future politicians, we keep inspiring people saying, you need to go into politics. I tried, by the way, in 2018, didn't go very well for me.
Where did you run for?
I ran for mayor of Jerusalem.
Yeah. You need some boot camp training at the Institute of Politics. Maybe.
I'm happy to come for that, but it is something I am reconsidering for the future. And I think we need more peace activists to say we will get involved in politics.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a couple more things. See, I have very concrete. But there's also pushing our politicians. I think, and this is something for Americans, in the region, not just Israel, in the region, we have spent ridiculous amount of money on weapons and literally no money on peace building.
Yeah.
And you can't invest in war and then be surprised that you end up with war. You can't invest in weapons and say, we wonder why people just don't want peace. Well, maybe if we change how we work, and this is true for Democrats and Republicans. It is not a one-party thing. Unfortunately, it's bipartisan that we have been like, we're just going to keep sending weapons, whether it's to Israel or to its neighbors or to other countries. And I think we need to push our politicians to move from investing in tools of destruction to tools of construction. And that's something we all can do. We need to build coalitions between Americans, people in Israel and Palestine. The peace activists there need people here to work with them. So there's a lot that we can do together.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, we spoke earlier this afternoon, and I had said to Magen, but I'm not going to ask you political questions because you're not political, and you scoffed. And he said, it's all political. Like, we are all political actors, and I think the idea of not seeing it in silos is really important because these fields tend to be very siloed and not actually talk to the people at negotiating tables or in positions of influence to change things. Anything to add on that? All right, well, it's time to go to Q&A, and we are gonna, as we always do, preference student questions first, but please feel free to line up in the middle, ask your question, introduce yourself and what year you are. You can line up right now.
Hard questions go to Magen. I'm happy to answer all the easy ones.
That's fine.
Hi, please.
Hi, thank you both so much for coming to speak with us today. Really, it was incredible to hear you both speak, and I'm in awe of the work you two are doing together. I'm a member of the Israeli peace movement. I have been for many years. The summer before October 7th, every Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, I was protesting with Mistaklim Likibush Be'inayim, which is looking the occupation in the eye. And I was very proud to be part of the Israeli peace movement. After October 7th, my colleagues, the sense that I got from my colleagues was, look at Tami Suchman. She was a resident in Kibbutz Be'eri. I went to her home in Kibbutz Be'eri. She was a peace activist. She personally drove to Gaza to take eligible citizens to hospitals in Israel, and she was shot and burned alive in her house. And what my colleagues in the peace movement, the sense that I got from them is, why should we continue doing this if nobody's on the other side to accept the hand we are stretching out? And there was a sense of despair and a sense of futileness. And why should we continue doing this and receiving backlash from our right-wing government and our right-wing neighbors if there's no partner in peace? And a lot of them stopped being members of the movement. What would you say to members like that who I know? And also, the Israeli peace movement is very prominent. People call themselves, like, I'm an Israeli peace activist. Maybe I am wrong, but my follow-up question is, there's not as prominent of a Palestinian peace movement, not an organized organization. Do we need one? I think we do. And how can one happen?
Thank you. So 2 questions.
Yeah.
Take those.
Are these easy or hard questions?
I'll take the first one. So I speak to a lot of people, among them people who were left, let's call them lefty Israelis, before October 7th, and I think part of what we're doing now is, part of what we need to do is, in a way, preaching to the converted. So taking those people who shared our values before October 7th and kind of bringing them in, back in. I think, I'm thinking of I have a particular person in mind. I think we need to acknowledge that people in Israel and Palestine are not in the post-traumatic stage, they're in trauma. So those kinds of reactions, I don't think they're based on, a reasoned, logical process. They're speaking out of it's punching that person back. I think this is where it comes from, and I understand it. I think people who are attracted or completely despaired or are attracted to violence at the moment, the vast majority of them are just, this is the trauma speaking out of their mouth. Yeah. And then I think what we can offer them is a hug. And it's like just a willingness to listen to support them, it's hard, and not try and win them over by arguing, but it's more of a listening process. And I can say for myself, I started therapy after October 7th. That's really helpful. It allows me to have a more, reasoned approach to what is happening, rather than just being repeatedly living October 7th over and over and over again, which is what happens if you follow Israeli media, right? It's this cycle of it's still happening, and there's missiles from here and there. It's scary. I mean, and I think it's important to realize that Israelis and Palestinians, and I think that also happens in the diaspora as well. If people are going on TikTok for an hour or two a day, they see videos coming out of Gaza, or videos coming out from October 7th, they're traumatized themselves. So I think much of that reaction of there's no one on the other side, they're not human beings, this kind of dehumanization comes out of trauma. And I think my first approach now is just, okay, why are you saying that? Do you really believe that? And I think ultimately, if you allow yourself to listen well, that's the best way of bringing those people back. And I thought today Aziz, you go and then maybe.
One about Palestinian
And
groups.
the second one's almost connected to the first one. So I've known Vivian Silver for many, many years. She was a peace activist, an iconic peace activist who was killed on October 7th. What maybe many don't know is her son, Yonatan, is literally one of the main activists today in the Israeli-Palestinian sphere, who's become a very good friend. I didn't know him before, and has become one of my very good friends. We've traveled together, we've met together, been to his home since then. And it's kind of amazing to me that many of the people who got the second-hand trauma are much more, I've met hostage families. I met, like I mentioned, Abdurrahim, who lost many in his family. I met Yonatan, who are so dedicated to peace. But you get a lot of us in our communities who didn't directly sometimes experience loss, but are much more radical sometimes, which is an interesting thing. But on the second question, I would say part of it is lack of knowledge. So for example, on Vivian Silver, since she was killed, in Gaza, a group of Palestinians set up an aid area, a kitchen basically, to help people who have escaped the bombing. And they called that kitchen Vivian Silver Kitchen. And it was a huge sign with Vivian Silver to honor her. And I got the photos for it from people in Gaza. Now, I think partially this information never gets spread. But if you look at the main peace organizations, I would argue, in Israel and Palestine, most of them are joint. They're not Israeli peace organizations. When we talk about Combatants for Peace, their office is in Bethlehem. Their director in Bethlehem is Rana Salmat. She's Palestinian. You look at the Parent Circle. Their director, actually their chairman is Magen's sister, and their director is a Palestinian woman as well. You look at so many, Healing Across the Divide, the same thing. You have an Israeli and a Palestinian woman. But the reason people think of those organizations as Israeli is they registered in Israel. Most donor countries, including the US, makes giving money to Palestinian organizations impossible, so everything goes through the Israelis, which, by the way, perpetrate this concept of power dynamic. The Israelis always in most of these organizations have more power than the Palestinians, and it makes our partnerships so much harder. I ran a few of these organizations. I was the chairman of the Parent Circle Bereaved Families Forum. It was extremely hard to go to those meetings with USAID, with the European Commission, and realizing they don't talk to the Palestinian. They only trust the Israeli in those meetings. So there is also part of that makes a peace movement on the Palestinian side much harder. Let's also dream of back in the day, in the year 2000, before the Second Intifada started, there was a huge rally for peace in the middle of Gaza, in Palestine Square in Gaza. Those things happened. Now, again, we don't talk about them. They didn't get written about much, but they do happen. They still happen today. I was two months ago in Jericho, marching with Israelis and Palestinians, asking for equality on water issues together. And there were tons of Palestinians there, and we were hand in hand. The police didn't like either of us. We got treated all equally terrible, because, like I said, that's what scares them when the two of us are together.
Yeah. Please.
Thank you so much. The question I'd like to ask actually stems from something that you said, Aziz, which I found very inspiring. You mentioned that when you were in school, you found that there was a divide, or that you would see a divide between people who shared your values and had similar values and people who did not yet. And to me, that yet is a key word, because at least how I observe it in my university community and communities beyond is that people regard others who have differing views and opinions as essentially unchangeable. They see them as, hostile, and often ascribe characteristics onto them that they don't have. And one thing that I was wondering about is it important, or do you believe that it is equally important to talk to people with the same values as it is to talk to people who may not, or at least who may not yet, as you mentioned? And then how do we go about creating that process for us to have dialogue with people who don't share the same perspective?
Great question.
Absolutely. I think it is extremely important to talk to everyone. Look, my whole family was in the not yet, so I had to keep talking to them. And I'll give you just a small example. I like telling stories because I can talk forever of my opinion, but who cares? But my dad is approaching his 90th, and very troublemaker, very stubborn guy. When I started doing my piecework, he thought I'm crazy. He thought I'm an idiot. He thought I'm wasting time. You cannot trust any Israelis. They killed your brother. They killed his cousin. They killed multiple people in the family. So you cannot do it. And slowly I started getting him into coming to things. And I brought him to the US 6 years ago. And he wanted to go to the mosque for Friday prayer. And so I sent him with a friend who can take him there. And when he came back, I asked him, how was it? And he said, oh, was it great? I'm like, you like the mosque? He's like, oh, we didn't pray in the mosque. I'm like, so where did you pray? He's like, well, the mosque was full. And I'm like, you didn't pray outside, it was cold. He's like, no, we went to the synagogue. Like, synagogue? I'm not sure what you're talking about. And he's like, apparently Jews and Muslims get along here. And they actually,
Wow.
they actually rent each other buildings for events. And when the mosque is full, they take the synagogue. And so the overflow from the mosque go to the synagogue across the street. And they've been doing it for many years. I actually just met the rabbi.
Adams Center?
Yes, it's the Adams Center in Virginia. Yeah. And he was so excited. This is a guy who, a few years earlier, would never step in a synagogue. And he was so excited, he started calling my family, like my brothers, my uncle. He's like, guess where I prayed today? And they're like, it's Friday, you prayed in a mosque. And he's like, no, I prayed in a synagogue. And they're like, Aziz, did you convert our dad to Judaism? Like, no. And he's like, you don't get it. And this is a man who grew up in Jerusalem. You know how many synagogues are in Jerusalem? Quite a few. And yet he needed to come to America to do it, but he was willing to. And to me, that's an example of how people do change. The moment that availability, you give them more exposure, you get them to hear a narrative they didn't hear, and slowly they do change. And I have a million stories. If we had another hour, I would just share those.
I want the short form version of your answers to the questions.
I'm done.
Megan, do you have anything to add to that?
This is great.
I just want to get to all the students, please.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. This was an incredibly moving, educational, eye-opening conversation and funny. I'm wondering, because I feel like this conversation and in these settings and smaller, intimate conversations are some of the only places where we can kind of cut across the divide. We can talk about the shared vision, and people here might not all have the same, views or ideas of where we're coming from right now, but seem to be able to come together and listen and engage in this way. But I'm going to push on the concrete things. How do we scale up these types of conversations with Israelis, Palestinians, and in the US? I have mixed feelings on the fact that the conversation in the United States and on college campuses here seems to dominate so much of the conversation because this isn't, as involved the US is in our conflict, and it seems almost wrong, unfair, or distracting that the college campuses here seem to be getting so much more airtime in certain ways, but it's still an important, part of the conversation, but it seems to be no one is willing to have these types of conversations at that scale. So how do we, push for this type of open vision sharing, value sharing, when it seems like with social media, with large school protests, people aren't willing to have those conversations and cut through social media, which I know you've touched on some of it, but just like, especially with the social media and the US college campus issue.
So, in one sentence, we keep saying that this is not about winning the argument. We need to focus on changing reality. So we can argue about the meaning of that word or the other, or who is right and whose violence is justified, and basically argue about the past. And instead, what I think we should do conceptually is talk about the future. Like, there's no justice for the murder of my parents. I don't know what it means. But I won't forgive myself if my kids have to go through the same violence that my parents suffered. And so it's not letting go of the past, but it's focusing on the future. And I think for college campuses, in a way, like, guys, it's not about you. Okay? And so, but in a loving way, we need more people to join the coalition of those who think pragmatically about the issue and are trying to actually change reality rather than win the argument. And if someone is trying to win the argument, let them win. Like, yeah, here, you won. You're right. So what?
Now what?
Yeah, what do you want the future to be? Where should Israel-Palestine be in 10 years from now? Okay, how do we get there? So I think if we start asking those questions, there's answers. There's plenty of answers, but we have to ask those questions. And when we have to work with, again, let me put it, we're willing to work with anyone, even if there are Trump. Okay, it doesn't matter. Like, if they're willing to push a policy that would make life better for Israelis and Palestinians, sure, they're a partner. Even if I disagree with them on 99% of things, but there's this one policy that we can work on together and push it through and make a change that would save lives, like, they're a partner. So it's looking for reasons why to partner up with people rather than reasons why not to partner up with people. So I'm willing to work with anyone. Again,
we disagree on 99. But no,
do you have a quick response to that?
I think that's good. There are a lot
I also
of
think
people
what you said is true of a lot of conflicts. You don't have a response. I do want to say, like, Aziz and Magen's brother Maoz have a TED Talk. So if you just want to send that to people to give them a frame of this conversation or this conversation, that's always something that's available.
Well, maybe then I'll add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say for social media stuff, we have started a website called dualnarrative.org, which we're going to be adding tons more videos to it. And it has a lot of multiple narratives, just so people understand the different narratives. You won't, regardless who you are, you probably won't agree with half of the stuff there, but that's the point. We're trying to create content to speak to people on things they don't know. And so that's one area that you can look at. And the goal is to have a lot of resources, as many resources as possible. So we're building it up. And then we are working on, when I say coalition, we are working on events, for example, this coming spring in Israel and Palestine. We're doing a big, major events in Jerusalem. And the goal is to find partners all across the world to create the same events every major city in the world. And so we need you to be part of that.
Is it
It's
it
time.
because you realize like there's a moment here?
Yes.
Yeah. We definitely see
Absolutely.
the opportunity.
Yeah, there's no reconciling the loss that has happened, but there's a moment here that needs to be grabbed for those who want
Absolutely.
peace. Please, quickly, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Sergio Kuchko, and I am a graduate student at Harris School of Public Policy with a focus on conflict resolution. And my question would be about expanding on the narrative, the dominant narratives, the dominant discourses that you mentioned. In particular, how would you respond to my mind, a more pernicious version of this idea that the only way for Israel to proceed is basically treat Palestinian activism as violence and put those scares these people with combative violence in response and put these people in prison and treat the tragedy of the 7th of October as an opportunity to actually finally drive this violence with violence out of the picture. Or a narrative from the Palestinian side that we should just gradually take time, but still try to push Israelis out of our land because it's our historic land and Israel has no place here. Israelis have no place here. So how would you respond to those more challenging versions of these dominant narratives?
I want to take all of them,
Yeah,
and then
let's
have
do
you
it.
just close and respond. So I'll take all the remaining questions, please.
All right. Hi, my name is Carter. I'm a second year in the college. So tonight we've seen an incredible display of unity and civility, but if everyone saw the issue the way you did, or you do, we wouldn't have the conflict that we have today. So what % of Israelis and Palestinians do you think agree with you?
Great question. And then, please.
I'm not a student. Is that okay?
That's okay.
All right.
Please go
Hi,
ahead.
my name's Kyle. I'm an educator, so my question centers around your thoughts about the utility of academic boycotts. Thank you.
Okay, you got them?
Yeah.
Go for it.
These look hard, so maybe.
So the idea that violence is the way, or that the phrase in Hebrew is translated to something like total victory against Hamas, because victory is not enough. So the idea that you can somehow eliminate someone's motivation to hit you back by hitting them hard enough is just insane. And we've been trying to do that for decades. It's not working. So this idea of, and it's even worse than that, because I think ultimately Bezalel Smotrich is the current Israeli Minister of Finance. He's come from the very extreme right. He's a settler. And he's quoted saying, I don't remember when, but he's quoted saying, Hamas is an asset. But why would he say that Hamas is an asset? Okay, that's a few years ago. Because for those two narratives, they are actually partners.
Yeah.
They feed off one another. For one extremist, it's actually great that there's an extremist enemy on the other side. That's not a threat. We are a threat. So for them, they feed off one another. So for Smotrich, Hamas was an asset. And again, we don't want to get into too much details, but that was part of Israeli policy over the years to strengthen Hamas. So it's unsurprising, and again, I'm not taking responsibility away from Hamas for what they've done, but this idea of total victory is fake, because they don't want total victory over Hamas. For them to have some kind of Palestinian extremist resistance always operating is a good thing. And so if you really want total victory over Hamas, you need peace.
Yeah.
That's what we're offering. So, and again, this is the pragmatic approach.
You want to
You have
answer
1
any of
minute
the
to
other?
sum it all up. Go for it.
I'll go
We
for
really
the...
stick to time?
We'll go a little over, but please, try.
Wow, I'm like Chicago,
Why?
impressive. Wow. Okay. I'll take the other two.
Yeah, go for it.
How many percentage of people agree with us? I think a lot of people do agree with us. However, if you ask Israelis and Palestinians, do you want peace? The answer is usually yes. If you ask them, do you believe peace will happen? That's when you start getting less people. And the trick with that is people lost the belief in peace. They lost, and then they become indifferent. And that's a challenge. That's the biggest challenge we have to do, is really not winning over so much those who disagree with us. It's winning over those who believe it's impossible now, and getting them to dream again, getting them to act again, getting them to get out in the streets again, getting them to talk to their family, to their friends, and to say, yes, we can make this happen. So that's what we're trying to do. And
I'll add briefly, okay? Part of why
No, it's okay.
part of why Hamas chose October 7th is because it was echoing 50 years since the 1973 October war between Israel and Egypt. So they specifically wanted to echo that war 50 years ago. We have to remember that 5 years later, Israel and Egypt signed a peace agreement, and that happens against popular opinion in Israel. Sadat, who was the Egyptian president at the time, comes to the Israeli parliament, gives a speech that turns around Israeli opinion on the issue, and they sign a peace agreement. So that was 5 years against the worst war Israel had up until what's happening now. 5 years after, there's a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. So peace is not, and Begin, who was the Israeli right-wing prime minister who signed the peace agreement with Sadat, said war is avoidable, peace is inevitable. It is inevitable.
I hope so.
Okay? It's coming. It's just a question of time. And how many, and what we're trying to say is we're trying to minimize the lives lost until we get there. But conflicts around the world get resolved. It's a matter of time.
And I'll end very quickly with the boycott action question. Look, I'm not against boycott in general. I think most of us are not against boycott in general. But academic boycott, I think, is, in my opinion at least, and I think I've been influenced by Edward Said, who was also opposed to it, is not the best path. Maybe there are specific circumstances it could be used, but in general, I think that's not the direction. But maybe if it's okay, I'll end with a poem by Samih al-Qasim, and I'll probably not say it fully accurate because I'll translate in my head from Arabic to English. And in it he says, the day I'm killed, my killer will find rifling through my pockets 3 traveling tickets. 1 to peace, 1 to the fields and the rain, and 1 to the conscience of a humankind. So I beg you, my killer, do not waste such a thing. Do not waste these tickets. Go and travel.
Amen.
What a fitting note to end on. Please join me in thanking these 2 gentlemen for being here today. Thank you all for being here as well.
And if you didn't